Greetings, mortals, peers, and queers. We are here for another interview, and I am excited. As much as I love the debates, I love these interviews so much more. So, without further ado, if you guys want to be interviewed or debate me, you can check out the Discord linked in the description, where all of our communities, with every creator that I have interviewed, their communities are also linked to this Discord as well. You can chat with them. If you want to support me, I have a Patreon. And with that, let's jump into it, and I will ask the name and pronouns of my interviewee. How you doing?
Good. How are you? I did you want like my name or like my creator handle,
Give us
I
your
guess.
creator handle and then whatever name you use to interact with the audience.
Okay. So on TikTok, that's pretty much the only social media I really use. I am Cinnamon Toast Butts with two S's at the end. But I typically just go by Anna. So my pronouns are she, her.
Nice, nice. All right. So, sort of introduce yourself. What sort of content creator are you?
Kind of more generic left-leaning content I create. I do make some videos kind of that touch on my past being in the right and kind of the things that I've noticed in my transition going further left. Um, yeah, just kind of anything that I really have an idea on how to make comparisons to things, and it's generally um, hot topics that are being discussed at the time. So,
Well, I'm a big fan of Hot Topics. So, what drew you to leftism? You said you used to be further on the right. So, what prompted the change? What drew you to a more left leaning perspective?
so when I was raised obviously in like a very right leaning conservative type household. We kind of discussed the things that my parents believe in and do previously, and so going into my adulthood, I wasn't really equipped with my own ideas and how things should work. I was very much still operating on the things that I was taught growing up. And I think a lot of like the right leaning teachings, as far as the ideology goes, is more so about that the left is just wrong. Like they're just wrong. It's not about proving your ideology right, it's about just disagreeing with the other side. And I kind of think I realized that about 2 years ago. Um, it's I kind of saw that, and I saw a lot of the hypocrisy on the right, and I was like, well, there's probably a reason for that. I tried to rationalize it, but just as things were going on, I kind of started seeing like it's not, there's no rationale for it. It's just plain hypocrisy. So I used to debate and argue in like Facebook comment sections all the time with a right leaning perspective. And I would have my ass handed to me because I just didn't know what I was talking about. I just didn't know things. All I was doing was just holding on to that, well, I'm right because I'm on the right, you know, type mentality. So
Mm-hmm.
once I was able to, like we said earlier, once I was able to kind of be like, all right, well, let me take a step back. Maybe I'm the one that is incorrect, and maybe let's try to rethink this. And just from there, has been a kind of a landslide just into leftism.
All right, very interesting. Thank you for sharing. So then, what kind of leftists are you, and why?
So I I'm nothing if not honest. I used to be very much an ANCAP, like pure unfettered market. I totally believed that that was like the way to go. That was gonna work. Um, and then being in economic discussions with all sorts of people, not just people on the left, socialists, both socialists and communists were both like, no, that's very much wrong. Even though they can differ in their own ideologies, they were both kind of spot on by saying, nah, that's not how it goes. So, I am still kind of figuring all this out. I'm not exactly sure if I would say I'm a socialist or a communist. Now that I've kind of realized that capitalist propaganda has done to communist propaganda what capitalist propaganda accused communist propaganda of doing, if that makes any sense. It's like kind of
Mm-hmm.
a reverse blame psychology type thing. I'm kind of starting to see that it makes more sense. Like it does make sense. But obviously I don't know the specifics on it. So I wouldn't really want to get into a economics debate in that realm.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you're generally a leftist, but you don't have a like a hard label to stick to yet.
Yeah, I don't really know like
All right,
what
that's fair.
hard labels are, I guess. I'm still um feeling my way around that.
Hey, that's all right. That's all right. Okay, then let's move on to our next slate of questions. What do you think of the current state of the U.S., especially from your perspective as someone who used to be on the right and is now on the left? Um, and sounds like quite recently. So, how has the last couple of years, in your perspective on the U.S., how has that changed?
Well, I think one way that the right and the left can agree is that the state of the United States is pretty awful right now. On reasons why it is awful, that's where it differs. Um, Obviously, it's very hard to kind of explain just because I think both sides kind of have a point, although obviously the left to me makes a lot more sense in their rationale. But I do think as far as the right goes, they're typically more for less government control and that the government is corrupt. And I think everybody can agree that that the government's corruption is definitely one of the center issues. However, there are outside influences such as private corporations that have a pretty big influence on the way our government acts right now.
Interesting.
So,
Okay. Um, how do you think the midterms in 22 will go?
um, I'm I'm hoping with how everything within the last couple years, like how strongly people have been, I guess, voicing their activism. Um, to me, maybe it's just that I'm looking at it through a different lens, but I do feel like people have been more active in their beliefs, the things they believe in. So I'm hoping that obviously that will kind of affect the midterms coming up. But I mean, also, wasn't there that Supreme Court case Moore versus Harper? That's gonna. I'm not sure if that's gonna come into effect. It's pretty much where states can.
Yeah, it's pretty frightening. I don't think
Yeah,
they've ruled on
that's
it
very
yet. They
concerning.
went on summer recess, and that's it.
So, but I don't know if that's gonna play a role in that or not. So
All right.
it is kind of scary. So, but hopefully, people kind of show out and start voting blue. I'm definitely going to be voting blue um, this coming election. So,
Okay. Um, okay, so that tells us how the 2022 midterms will go. How do you think the 2024 presidential run will go?
that I'm not so sure about. The last two elections, despite the last election going in favor of the Democratic Party, and I want to make it clear, I'm not like a shill for the Democratic Party or anything. Like, yeah. Um, but we're having issues with our elections and the just overall confidence in them. Trump being able to win the presidency despite not having the popular vote.
Mm-hmm.
And then this last election, essentially, to me, it was almost overturned. That's what it kind of almost seemed like. So it's who knows what's going to happen. I know that the Republicans are going to put up a good fight, and we don't really know what they have up their sleeves. So, mm.
All right. What do you you sort of touched on this with the Harper v. Moore. What do you think of the current state of the Supreme Court? Especially, again, hitting on your experience as someone who used to be on the right and is now on the left. How has your
um,
perspective on the Supreme Court has changed, and how does past you view how the Supreme Court is now versus how do you view it right now as a leftist?
to be honest, I was shocked that Roe versus Wade was overturned. Even when I was on the right, I was a pretty adamant pro-lifer. even then, I really never thought it would actually get overturned. And just the fact that, what is it? Was it two that Donald Trump was able to appoint two, that he didn't win the
Three.
popular vote. He put three on? Okay.
Three.
Uh, he was able to put three
It was,
judges
I
on,
think,
and he was
Neil
someone that didn't
Gorsuch,
even.
Amy Coney Barrett, and Brett Kavanaugh.
That's right. That's right. I forgot about Neil Gorsuch. But yeah, just the fact that someone that didn't win the popular vote in the presidency was able to put three Supreme Court judges, that's that's asinine. I mean, obviously, back when I was on the right, it was I was kind of on the fence right around when Coney Barrett, is it Comey or Coney? I just know her as
I think it's
ACB
Comey.
with an M.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, for her, I was kind of on the fence when that was going down, but for Brett Kavanaugh, again, I'm embarrassed, but I definitely was on the side of, oh, she's definitely lying about it. He's fine. Um, but yeah, I was very much misguided in those conclusions. But as a right leaning person, I was like kind of excited about that. But now I see that. Uh, so
You're telling
this
me
is part of my
SNL's
penance.
sketches on how much he drinks beer didn't convince you to turn to leftism?
Mm. Listen, this is part of my penance. Okay, I have to be honest.
All right, all right. What do you think is who do you think should run in 2024?
For which side? Or I mean, I guess. Uh,
Uh,
I mean, anybody.
yeah,
My
anybody,
dog
but on the
would
left.
be
Who
better.
do you think is going to run on the Republican side, and who do you think should or will run on the Democrat side? Or
I mean, it
unless you're
kind of.
voting third party, it's really going to surprise me.
I wouldn't say I would vote for third party. So for the Republicans, I know DeSantis was kind of a hot pick for a while. He was kind of in the running. I, Jesus, for the love of God, I think Trump is. There's like some kind of buzz that Trump might run again. Jesus Christ. And it kind of sucks that Bernie is getting up there in age. But I think that he would be an awesome person to run. I'm definitely kind of recognizing a lot of the things he.
He'll be, I think, 81 by
Yeah,
2024.
I don't think he will. I think he's just gonna be a little too old, maybe. But I don't know. Stranger things have happened. I mean, how old is Biden now? In his 70s? So who knows? But um, oh my God.
There
I.
is, in the last couple interviews, we've talked about Katie Porter.
Mhm.
She got famous for taking the pharma industries to task as her experience as a teacher. She would bring up various creative graphs and things like that to really demonstrate the spending of the pharma companies and things like that. And there's a lot of buzz around her being a potential candidate.
I saw an interview, or I'm not sure if it was an interview, like a kind of a cross-examination type deal on her, um, talking about gun rights with
Hmm.
somebody, and she was actually doing a really good job. So I liked her take on I liked her take on that. So she would absolutely be a good candidate.
All right, awesome. Okay, last question of this slate. Uh, what is the left's position on Democrats? Are they friend? Are they foe? Are they something more?
So from what I've kind of gathered is from my relatively brief time of kind of being on the left,
Hmm.
is that they're not friends. They're essentially rebranded Republicans, um, as far as American Democrats go. So I don't think they're considered friends. They're kind of more just kind of kicking the can down the road rather than actually implementing any sort of helpful legislation to reflect leftist views. So I don't think they're seen as like friends.
Okay, so you're holding to the sort of leftist position of Democrats are there to slow down the Republicans.
Sort of like they're kind of a buffer
Mm-hmm.
between, like, it's like kind of a spectrum sort of thing, and they're like kind of in the middle, but not necessarily. They share a lot of characteristics with Republicans. So,
All right, then I would ask you, what is your position on Biden? What is the left's outlook on Biden?
uh, I mean, I feel like everybody kind of agrees that he's not the best. And the way that I think this is kind of funny because the way that the right talks about makes fun of the left, like, oh, well, this is what you guys wanted. Well, the left doesn't idolize the president. The left doesn't do what the right did for Trump. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've never once seen like a truck with a Biden flag flying behind it, but I have seen quite a few with Trump. So it's I think that we definitely view the president, even if he's Democratic, differently than Republicans view a Republican president. So, but generally, I think that he kind of sucks. He's just kind of he's too old. I feel kind of bad for him almost. I don't think he's a bad person. I just think that he's should not hold um, president the
All right.
presidential office.
All right. Next slate of questions. What do you think are the major obstacles for the left?
I think I mean, obviously the main one being capitalism, having to deal with that whole can of worms, and that's not even just the government. That's private influence that essentially has their own rules. They can lobby through the government and influence to generate legislation that benefits them. So I think that's probably the biggest threat to leftist ideology.
What do you think are the obstacles the left is facing, sort of in the more immediate future right now?
I mean, what I I guess public opinion maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I say we as in as if I'm part of this side. I think that the left is kind of still dealing with that anti-communist rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
That's still pretty, I think, pretty widespread. So I think that's kind of but I don't know. I'm not really sure what you mean by like short term. I'm curious to see what your thoughts on that are, though. I know it's an interview for me, but
Yeah, no, you're welcome to ask me questions. My thoughts on what are the obstacles of the left is certainly getting us a platform to rally around. The left is rather infamous for its infighting, split between socialists, anarchists, communists, tankies. We'll get to them, and the various in groups. Part of it is a PR thing, trying to get over the aesthetics and the associations with the old Soviet empires. Um, and then, you know, a real big thing that I personally try and hit on with this channel, with my debates, with my interviews, is getting leftists to communicate with, work with, and talk to other leftists and build communities together. I've been in the online left for since 2018. It's 2017, 2018. And one of the things that I've really noticed is a really big thing is that a lot of leftists are happy to sit in their rooms and they make content, and that content reaches lots of people, and that's great. But I want to see more cross contamination of the audience. I want to see more collaborations. I want to see people shouting each other out. I want to see networks of people being built up. Not just these isolated figures that the audience tends to associate.
it's a very good point. I hadn't even really kind of thought of that, but you're right. There's not really. I think that that is one of the immediate barriers in that also taking um, local roles or roles in your local government and then moving up to higher levels that there really is no representation there. So that's definitely something that's difficult, and that we're kind of stuck in this two-party system that it seems almost impossible to escape from. So that's actually a really good point. So
So, in your opinion, what are the greatest strengths of the left? What are we best at, in your perspective? Especially coming from
using
someone who used to be on the right and is now on the left, what do we excel at that draws you to us so much?
using science and reasoning and logic. I've found that even though I'm like still in the infancy stages of like transitioning to the left, that it is so much easier to argue with people by just being like, well, here's this study that shows that what you're saying is very unlikely to work, or here's this study that says, or this survey, or this, you know, research that makes it so easy. Like, yeah, it's a lot of the time I spent arguing when I was on the right was like how to get around these sources that these people are using. It was like, okay, well, this looks really credible, but how do I like say that this is wrong, you know? So, you know, it's embarrassing to have to admit that I used to do that. But I want to be honest with myself and honest with the things that I believe in. And I just, at the end of the day, I just want to like be on the side, the right side of humanity. And this is where I think it is right now. So,
Okay, and combining our last couple questions into one, what do you think the left could be doing better right now?
I think this would tie into kind of what we were talking about in the question before the last one. Uh, Rallying together, organizing,
Mm,
becoming organized. I think that's probably the best thing that they could be working on to kind of take that next step, because I think that the ideology is there. I think that the reasoning is sound. It's just kind of getting it to kind of take off, actually.
all right.
Not that it hasn't taken off, but you know, to kind of impact on an even larger scale.
Yeah, no, that's good. And we'll move on to our next slate of questions. What do you say to new and young and emerging leftists? It's people who were on the fence just like you. Um, what do you say to them to sort of convince them to tip over?
Um, I would kind of just remind them to uh, what are your priorities? Because on the right, it's always about arguing semantics, arguing like finding somewhere where the opposition is wrong to like kind of cling to that. And it's not so much about actually thinking about on a higher level how your policies impact people on a small scale, a medium scale, a large scale. And so I really just tell them to like what are your priorities, to isolate what your priorities are. Do you just want to argue with people? Do you just want to um, argue to argue, or do you want to argue for change? And I think that that is kind of, if someone had told me that earlier on, maybe pre transition for me,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of, and I mean, people did say it in a roundabout ways, and I think that's really what kind of made me stop and think, well, okay, like I'm definitely don't know it all. So what am I missing here? I'm clearly missing something. So,
Can I ask, was there a like a particular issue that really the straw that broke the camel's back, or something that really drove the wedge in deep? Um, what was there a single issue that turned you, or was it a cumulative effect?
I'd say it was kind of a domino effect, or like it was the first one I would say would probably be like how women are viewed on the right and how they're treated on the right. And I have a video on this on my page about how I'm noticing behavior of women on the right and how they tend to gravitate towards more masculine deemed activities and traits and stuff. And I believe, and I used to do that too, but I did that because I wanted respect as a woman. And the only way I could receive respect as a woman is if I acted like a man. And even when I did those things, even when I became pretty good at those things like hunting, fishing, just the outdoorsy stuff, I became pretty good. And even then, I was always like just well, it's not that good. You're not that good at it. And so I just saw, I was like, no matter what I do, I will never be good enough. And so that was kind of where I saw the misogyny. And I
Mm-hmm.
guess like it was a personal issue to me. And that kind of, I started noticing how they treat people of color, how they treat disabled people, how they treat, uh, the LGBTQ community, how they just treat everybody. And then that was kind of like, you guys really aren't that great. So,
The cracks started to form and the facade started to crumble.
yes.
All right.
And I think I just wanted to talk about one of my favorite
Go
like
ahead. Go ahead.
instances. I was in a group chat with a lot of very right-wing people once, and one of them said something like, "We have the constitutional right to overthrow the government." And he said that, and I knew that wasn't true. I was like, "Wait a minute!" And he was a self-proclaimed constitutionalist, and that's like one of my favorite things that they say because it's like you have not read the Constitution and you don't know the laws of your own country. So that was definitely a big moment. I was like, ugh. So, but yeah, I thought that was kind of funny.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. What then would you say to your average Republican voter? You know, someone who hasn't moved over yet.
Oh man. So I interact with them on a pretty regular basis, like on TikTok and in comment sections, and I really just kind of focus on like the facts, the research, no remove any sort of bias. I'm trying to just do that because that was kind of what did it for me. And I've just noticed that a lot of them, when you try to do that, they just deconstruct into you're just wrong, kind of similar to some people that we know. Um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's kind of just difficult. And I'm like, well, if you don't want to accept all this evidence that shows that you are wrong, then that's your prerogative. But I've kind of decided, at least for now, that I don't want to completely shut those people off, shut them out, say that there's no hope. Because if I do that, there were people that had done that for me. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to, if they're, because there are people out there, obviously, that are on the right that might see that the left makes sense, but I don't know if they'd be embarrassed to move left, if they'd feel like they would lose friends, which obviously they probably will. And it can be kind of intimidating, the thought of just completely abandoning something that you've believed for so long. But so I think it's just kind of one of those things that you can't force someone to do. So
I like you better
yeah.
and better as this interview goes on. Um, okay. Wonderful. I want to ask then, have you seen because from the outside looking in, it seems like there's a split between older Republicans and newer Trump MAGA supporting Republicans. In your time on the right, was that distinction very clear?
Yes. Um, it is clear because I think that who they were influenced by is different. I think that the current, like the Gen Z Republicans, MAGA people, I think they're both influenced by their parents and also by the peers that agree with them, essentially. How social media makes it so easy to, when I was on the right, because I was even on right TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
and they would push, obviously, people that agreed with me on my For You page. So it's a lot easier to connect that way and to kind of validate your belief that, okay, well, there's all these strangers, like I don't even know these people, but they all agree with me. And it seems like it's a big community, but it's really not. And I think like older, like the boomer generation, obviously they would have been influenced by their parents as well, but I think they would have been more influenced by media, and the media at the time, at least, and a lot of government, kind of like what the government would put out.
Mm-hmm.
So just different influences.
Okay. Thank you for sharing. Um, let's see. This might be a little bit before your time, But are you aware of the Bernie or Bust crowd?
Ye I mean, I know that he has a very specific fan base. I know that there's people that are very much all about Bernie, but I mean, I'm not
Yeah,
really familiar
so
with them.
essentially, there was this crowd of, and I'm going to use big old air quotes, progressives who said that they would vote for Bernie or no one else. They wouldn't vote at all if it wasn't Bernie. Um, and there's a lot of people who advocate for saying that the Democratic Party is so corrupt, too corrupt, that they can't change it. No need to even try. Just give up and go home. Bernie didn't win, and if he couldn't win, no one can. We'll never get anything done. Um, some of them become quite accelerationist. I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology. Essentially, they think, well, if Donald Trump wins and turns us into a fascist autocracy, it'll be easier for us to do a socialist revolution with guns and overthrow the government. Um, what do you think about people like that? What is your initial thoughts on that description?
Okay. So, uh, back when I was on the right, there was
Mm-hmm.
a brief period where I was very 2A adamant, very pro 2A. Like everybody should be able to have any kind of firearm. There should be no limitations, nothing. Don't feel that way now. Um, so my opinion on the Second Amendment has changed. Just seeing all of I can't watch kids get shot and like think that you should still have. I can't. I
Mm-hmm.
used to own firearms. I don't anymore. Um, but I don't like the term pacifist because I guess the only times I've ever heard it used has been in a negative sense, and when I was on the right, and that was used as like, well, you're just a pacifist, commie pacifist, which I know doesn't really make sense, but that's what people would say
Mm-hmm.
um, on the right and stuff like that. But I mean, I don't think that violence would be the answer. Um, again, I'm not really a an expert on world history, and I know that a lot of crucial movements in history have required violence. Um, but in that kind of sense, a lot of people, a lot of innocent people would die and would really be negatively impacted by that. So I mean, I'm not very pro violence. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have to agree with
Interesting.
that.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think of the people who leftists who say don't vote, it's useless, the Democratic Party is too corrupt, we can't get anything done, don't vote? Do
I
you
mean,
do you
yeah.
believe in voting, or do you think we should not vote and do nothing, or do you think we should I had another interviewee on who talked a lot about mutual aid. Do you think we should do only mutual aid? Do you think we should do both? What is your thoughts?
What do you mean by mutual aid?
Mutual aid can be things like food banks, community hospitals, community gardens. Um, I know I work at a local food bank, but I've also volunteered at like clothing shelters, things like that. Um, or what are they called? Community closets,
Yeah,
things like
absolutely.
that. Getting
Yeah.
organizing resources within the community to better help that community. If I were to give you a broad definition.
No, that's a fine definition that helped me understand it a little more. Uh, my only concern with that, like, while that obviously sounds awesome, that some communities would might struggle more, and maybe it's because like I might have I might not be able to fully conceptualize on a larger scale what a more left-leaning society would look like. But how there are communities that are struggling today, would some kind of regulation on that, as in like say universal healthcare, that universal access throughout the nation, would that be a better option than, because some communities may like certain areas, they may not be able to have like a community garden, or they might be very
Mm-hmm.
limited on like the type of things they can grow. So but obviously I would need more to look into that more, and to really kind of just get a better understanding about what both of those would entail, as far as having community isolation, but not necessarily isolation,
Mm-hmm.
or a more larger scale um, universal access, if that makes sense.
All right, then let me ask you, what do you think are the best ways for the left to currently achieve its aims? What is our next best steps?
Pretty much tying back to that conversation, that organization, and that getting together and getting active and getting involved, connected in a connected way. I think that is that would be the next step. As far as how exactly, I, I know there's a lot of creators out there that hold events. I know Victoria Hammett is very, and I used to I used to hate her, but like now I really like understand what she's saying. So it's been really nice. But I know she organizes a lot of public. She's in charge of Gen Z for Change, or she's a part of that group,
Damn,
and they
nice.
organize a lot of public, like PR
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. So I think that's a great start.
Okay, interesting. Then we'll move on to our final slate of questions. This interview has been going by swimmingly. Do you fear a rise of fascism in the U.S.?
Yes, I do.
All right, can you elaborate?
I do think it's a very real threat, especially within the last couple of years, pretty much in during Trump's presidency. And while I would admit I was part of that problem during that time, I convinced myself, I was like, well, no, that's not going to happen. We're not the side of fascism. But then obviously I realized like that was not true. So I had to leave that. Just the way that everything is being handled, the fact that the Supreme Court is just out of control. Back to that Moore v. Harper, if states can just pretty much decide how elections go, despite how the people voted, that's very scary to me. I think that's probably the scariest aspect, that democracy is just going out the window. I used to be an adamant supporter of the Electoral College. I no longer am. I no longer believe in the effectiveness of that, or worthy or trustworthiness of that. So, but I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon, unfortunately.
Okay. What? Because we're almost done now. What sort of final lessons would you want to pass on to the viewer? What things have you learned from your shift from the right to the left that you wish more people knew about, more people understood?
Um, I think that towards the end of my time on the right, and when I was really like questioning myself, like what I believed in, I kind of felt like this guilt that I was basically going against these people that I thought I should trust, I should believe in. I thought that I would receive backlash, almost, that like they would call me a traitor, they would, and I just thought that there would be like this embarrassment and shame from it, like, oh my God, I've sacrificed my beliefs. But I really think that I'm a better person because of it, because I've been able to kind of accept that I was wrong, and that I was just um, probably dealing with a lot of like, and this isn't even necessarily political or economic, just a lot of stuff I dealt with growing up that kind of is synonymous with being on the right, that a lot of people just aren't, they kind of deal with that in by being on the right. If that, I don't know if that really makes sense. I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but Yeah, it's not, nobody's really gonna like take it personally. So really at the end of the day, it's just doing what you feel is right. So
All right. And I think with that, we'll conclude the interview. Why don't you give your final thoughts, closing statements, and then go ahead and shout yourself out again.
yeah. Basically, just listen to the science, listen to the reasoning. If you kind of have to say that, well, that's invalid because finding a reason to invalidate any research into why something works, uh, it's probably time to like reflect on why you think that. And that's what I did. And also, there is no shame in changing what you believe. And because you've educated yourself or you've been exposed to different perspectives. So there's no shame in it. If you want to change your mind, you can change your mind on something. If you want to grow as a person, you can grow as a person. So, but that's about it.
And that's touching. All right, shout yourself out.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Give
Just
us
me?
your socials. Give us where can people find you?
Oh, oh yeah. Okay. So, yeah, like I'm pretty much isolated to TikTok. I don't do like Instagram or Facebook or anything like that. Actually, I quit a couple years ago, kind of in the midst of all of this, just to kind of have a mental health uh moment for myself. But yeah, cinnamon toast butts with two S's at the end, no spaces, on TikTok. If you want some left-leaning content, you can go ahead and find me there.
All right, and I encourage my audience to go check them out. I will link them in the description below. And wow, they quit Facebook. Were I so strong? And with that, we'll conclude the interview. Again, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to be interviewed by me, if you're a leftist content creator, or if you want to debate me, if you're just a random chatter, or if you want to interact with any of the other communities that I have interacted with thus far, I think we're up to 4 separate content creators. Please do join the Discord linked in the description below. If you want to support me, I have a Patreon, and I would like to turn this into a bit of a higher budget production rather than just me in a bedroom on my computer. And with that, I will bid you all a good evening. Adios.